Kang Jae-hyun did not respond to humiliation. He responded to strategic imbalance. And Imani Sinclair had just created one. After Imani Sinclair transferred strategic ownership to his rival, publicly, deliberately, in front of the people who mattered most, everyone waited. For anger. For retaliation. For some visible sign that she had broken something in him. Nothing came. No statement. No countermove. No visible reaction at all. What came instead was silence. It was architecture. While Imani expanded into new corridors, Kang analyzed the variable. Then he redesigned the system. By the time Imani realized the walls were gone, the room had already been built. The office was on the 43rd floor. No art on the walls. No unnecessary furniture. A desk, 2 chairs, and a view of Seoul that most people would stop to admire. Park Sung-woo did not admire it today. He stood across from Kang Jae-hyun and explained the delay. A pharmaceutical import shipment had stalled at customs. Compliance paperwork. Routine, he said. Manageable, he said. A minor disruption with no real impact on operations. Kang did not move. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and listened to every word. Then he slid a document across the table. Park looked down. Termination notice. I don't understand, Park said. You anticipated retaliation, Kang said quietly. You did not anticipate adaptation. Those are different problems. You prepared for the wrong one. Park opened his mouth. Kang spoke first. The delay intersects a corridor recently acquired by the Sinclair-Mun alliance. That intersection is not random. Someone approved a routing adjustment 3 weeks ago without flagging the exposure. That someone reported to you. Park said nothing. Kang stood. Straightened his jacket. Send Director Yu in on your way out. No raised voice. No visible anger. Just a system removing a variable that no longer served its function. By the time Park reached the elevator, Director Yu was already walking toward the office with a new briefing file under her arm. The correction had taken 6 minutes. Kang's next meeting was in 7. Director Yu placed the file on the desk and stepped back. Kang opened it without sitting down. Inside were 31 pages. Financial routing diagrams. Corporate registry filings. Shell entity cross-references. Every move Imani Sinclair had made in the 40 days since the public transfer. He had not asked for this file today. He had requested it 5 weeks ago. She moved fast, you said. She moved predictably, Kang replied. He turned to the 3rd page. A network diagram showing Imani's new alliance structure. The Sinclair-Mun partnership sat at the center. Around it, 6 newly activated distribution agreements. 3 pharmaceuticals. 2 logistics. 1 venture capital bridge. Kang pointed to the venture capital bridge. Meridian Capital? Yes, you said. They signed a preliminary agreement with her sole entity 11 days ago. Kang turned 2 more pages. Meridian Capital's founding investor list. Near the bottom, a holding company registered in Singapore. That holding company had been seeded by one of Kang's silent entities in 2021. He did not highlight it. Did not comment on it. Just turned the page. She thinks she is operating outside my structure, he said. She is operating inside its shadow. You waited. Continue monitoring, Kang said. Do not interfere. He closed the file. The map was already drawn. Imani was simply still reading the wrong one. The shipment arrived 4 days late. Imani stood in the logistics bay of her sole distribution partner and watched her operations manager, Felix, work through the inspection report. 3 flagged line items. Minor documentation errors. Nothing serious on paper. But serious in timing. The pharmaceutical cargo was part of her first major independent deal, a supply contract with a mid-tier hospital group in Incheon. Delays meant renegotiation. Renegotiation meant a weaker first impression. This is a regulatory routine, Felix said. Happens with new operators. We are not new, Imani said. New to this corridor. She studied the inspection stamp. Cross-border pharmaceutical compliance. A division she had not needed to engage before the transfer. Who handles this corridor's compliance review? She asked. Felix checked his system. A contracted agency. GS Regulatory Partners. Imani wrote the name down. She did not react visibly. She did not reassign blame. She simply recorded the fact and moved forward. By evening, the cargo had cleared. But the delay had already reached the Incheon Hospital Group's procurement director. He sent a polite message asking for an updated delivery schedule. Imani sent the update with a discount attached. She absorbed the loss cleanly. What she did not yet know was that GS Regulatory Partners had been contracted through a logistics parent company that had not always been independent. The friction had a source. She had not found it yet. The call came from Meridian Capital on a Tuesday morning. Imani was in her office reviewing the Incheon contract adjustments when her assistant flagged it as urgent. She picked up. The voice on the other end was measured. Professional. A senior partner named David Lim. We wanted to touch base on the preliminary agreement, he said. It's on schedule, Imani replied. Of course. We have full confidence in the structure. There is one area our risk team flagged. Cross-border exposure concerns tied to your current logistics routing. Imani waited. Nothing that affects the deal directly, Lim continued. Just a note that our compliance board wants a secondary review before we finalize the capital commitment. How long? 2 weeks. Possibly 3. Imani did not react. Send me the specific concerns in writing, she said. Of course. She ended the call and turned to the window. 2 weeks was not catastrophic. But it was not nothing. The Meridian commitment was the backbone of her expansion phase. A delay there tightened timelines everywhere else. She typed a short message to Felix. Pull every active logistics route tied to our current operations. Flag anything with third-party regulatory dependencies. I want the list by morning. She did not call it a problem yet. She called it a pattern check. That distinction was the difference between panic and strategy. Felix's list arrived at 6:43 in the morning. Imani read it over coffee. 14 active logistics routes. 8 with third-party regulatory dependencies. Of those 8, 5 had experienced minor friction in the past 30 days. Inspection delays. Documentation flags. 1 route suspension lasting 48 hours before resolution. She set the coffee down. On its own, each item looked routine. New operator friction. Market adjustment. Standard compliance activity for a business entering unfamiliar corridors. Together, they formed a shape. Not an explosion. Not a direct attack. Just consistent, low-level resistance. The kind that slowed momentum without stopping it. The kind that was easy to dismiss as coincidence. Imani did not dismiss it. But she also did not escalate it. Not yet. She needed more information before she could name what she was seeing. Naming it too early would mean responding to the wrong target. Responding to the wrong target would waste resources she did not have available for waste. She forwarded the list to her analyst, Soo-jin, with one instruction. I need origin mapping on each flagged route. Who owns the infrastructure? Who contracted the oversight? 3 levels back on each one. Then she went to her 8 a.m. meeting. Calm. Prepared. On time. Whatever was applying pressure to her operations would not see urgency from her side. That was the first rule. Never show the timeline you are working against. Soo-jin worked for 36 hours without a full break. When she brought the origin mapping to Imani, she laid it out on the conference table in 3 rows. Color-coded. Each flagged route traced back to its infrastructure owner. Contracted oversight traced back 2 and 3 levels. Then she tapped the center of the table. Every friction point connects to one of 4 parent infrastructure chains, Soo-jin said. Imani looked at the diagram. Different companies, she said. On the surface. Different names. Different registration countries. Singapore. Hong Kong. Dubai. But Soo-jin placed a separate sheet next to the diagram. Founding documents. Board structures. Silent investor filings. 3 of the 4 chains have overlapping silent stakeholder profiles, Soo-jin said. Same pattern of entity construction. Same timeline of activation. 2019 to 2021. Imani studied the documents. You can't directly name the original investor, she said. Not from public filings, Soo-jin confirmed. But the construction method is consistent. Whoever built these entities used the same legal architecture across all 3. Imani straightened. She did not say the name out loud. She did not need to. The legal architecture Soo-jin was describing had a signature. A very specific way of layering entities so that control was never traceable at surface level. Buried inside subsidiary chains. Activated only when needed. She had seen it once before. In a due diligence file she had studied 18 months ago. Before she ever entered his structure. Imani spent the next 3 days doing nothing visible. No calls to legal teams. No messages to partners. No escalation meetings. She worked alone with Soo-jin's documents and a mapping tool that turned corporate registry data into visual networks. By the end of the 3rd day, the full picture was on her screen. Every flagged logistics route she operated touched infrastructure that had been built between 2019 and 2022. Some of it was direct. Distribution centers funded through holding companies. Regulatory contracts assigned through entities registered in Singapore. A pharmaceutical corridor supported by a supply chain company that had changed ownership twice, but whose original capital came from a venture fund that no longer advertised its founding backers. None of it was illegal. None of it was hidden, exactly. It was simply layered. Built deep enough that a new operator entering the corridor would never look past the surface. Would see a functioning, available, well-priced infrastructure and simply use it. And Imani had used it. Across 6 of her 14 active routes. She sat back. The friction was not random market adjustment. It was selective. Applied to specific routes. Routes that sat inside infrastructure where the original builder still held quiet influence. Not ownership. Not control. Influence. The kind that could slow a customs review by 48 hours. That could prompt a capital partners compliance board to request a secondary review. The kind that required no direct action at all. Just proximity to the right systems. Imani ordered the internal audit on a Friday. She kept the scope narrow. No external consultants. No announcements to partners. Just a quiet review of every active contract, every infrastructure dependency, and every third-party relationship inside her sole operations. She gave Soo-jin 2 additional analysts and a deadline of 10 days. Then she continued operating as normal. Meetings. Partner calls. Contract reviews. She showed nothing different to anyone watching from the outside. Inside, she was rebuilding her map. The audit's first priority was identifying routes that could be restructured away from flagged infrastructure. Clean replacements. Direct contracts. Supply chain relationships that did not pass through layered holding entities. The second priority was understanding the true cost of restructuring. Because she already suspected the answer. Moving away from affected infrastructure was possible. But it was not free. Some corridors had no clean alternative at the same operational cost. Others required relationship-building timelines that would delay her expansion by months. And some routes, when she traced them fully, led to a second problem. The clean alternatives were not independent either. They passed through Seoul's central financial clearing systems, which were stable, reliable, widely used, and partially supported through banking alliances that she had not yet fully investigated. She told Soo-jin to add those alliances to the audit scope. The audit was no longer just about logistics. It was about the edges of her operational world, and what was holding them up. On the other side of Seoul, nothing looked like surveillance. Kang Jae-hyun sat in a board review that lasted 2 hours. He signed off on a regional expansion for one of his pharmaceutical distribution entities. He approved a staff restructure in his Singapore office. He reviewed quarterly projections for 3 separate holding companies. Between agenda items, Director Yu passed him a single printed sheet. He glanced at it for 30 seconds. Folded it. Placed it under his notepad. The sheet contained 4 data points. 1. Imani had ordered an internal audit. 2. The audit had expanded to include clearing system infrastructure. 3. Her response timeline from first friction to structured investigation was 22 days. 4. She had identified 3 of the 4 flagged infrastructure chains. Kang returned his attention to the board presentation without comment. He did not share the information with anyone in the room. Did not send a reply. Did not adjust any current operation. He simply noted the response time. 22 days. That was faster than he had modeled. He had expected 28. After the meeting, walking to the elevator, he said one thing to you. She is thorough. You said nothing, because it was not a question. In the car, Kang looked out at the city. He was not concerned. Thoroughness inside a closed system only produced more detailed maps of the same walls. The audit would confirm what was there. It would not show her the exit. The Korean Infrastructure Investment Forum met once per quarter. It was not the kind of event where deals were announced. It was the kind where they were decided, quietly, before anyone entered the room. Imani attended because her venture capital relationships required visibility. Kang attended because the forum's steering committee included 3 people relevant to his regulatory positioning. They were in the same building for 4 hours before they were in the same room. When it happened, it was at the edge of the evening reception. No audience. No cameras. 2 people in a large room full of other conversations. Kang approached with a glass of water. Not wine. You reorganized quickly, he said. You prepared earlier, she replied. The meridian delay, he said. Inconvenient timing. Timing is rarely accidental in this city, she said. He looked at her steadily. No, he agreed. It is not. Neither of them stated anything directly. Neither accused. Neither confirmed. But the conversation had already exchanged information. She now knew he was aware of her meridian situation. He now knew she had traced the pattern far enough to understand it was not coincidence. They both understood the current position without naming it. Enjoy the forum, he said. He turned and walked toward the steering committee table. Imani watched him go. Calm. Still. Then she turned back to her own conversation. The exchange had lasted 90 seconds. Both of them had learned exactly what they needed. Imani arrived at her office the next morning with one question. Not is he blocking me. But where is he redirecting me? There was a difference. Blocking was visible pressure. It created friction until a target stopped or reversed. Redirecting was something else. It allowed movement but shaped its direction. Guided a target toward a corridor that served the redirector's purpose. She pulled up the audit results and looked at them differently. Not which routes are compromised, but which routes are untouched. She marked them. For routes with 0 regulatory friction. Clean infrastructure. Stable performance. No third-party dependency issues. She looked at where those routes led. 2 moved goods through the Busan port corridor. 1 connected to a manufacturing supply chain in Gyeonggi. One fed into a pharmaceutical distribution hub in central Seoul. All four were performing above projection. She stared at the central Seoul pharmaceutical route. It was her fastest-growing operational line. Strong margins. Reliable partners. No complications. She had been naturally expanding into it over the past 3 weeks because it was working. She pulled the infrastructure origin file for that route. The distribution hub at its center had been built in 2020. Capitalized through a regional infrastructure fund. That fund had 3 anchor investors. She scrolled to the third name. A holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. She searched the name in her registry database. 2 cross-references came back. One of them connected to an entity she had already flagged in Soo-jin's original map. She sat back slowly. She had not been blocked. She had been guided. The Seoul Pharmaceutical Distribution Hub was not a small asset. It processed shipments for over 40 independent operators. It had regulatory pre-clearance agreements with 2 government agencies. Its logistics capacity was considered essential infrastructure inside the city's mid-market pharmaceutical supply chain. And it had been financed, 3 years ago, through a capital structure that connected, 3 levels deep, to a silent entity that Soo-jin's audit had flagged as bearing the same construction signature. Imani spent the morning confirming the connection. She did not find direct ownership. That was not how these structures worked. She found influence. Capital relationship. A seat at the funding table that was never publicly listed but was present in the original investment documentation if you knew exactly what format to look for. She found it. Then she sat with the information for a long time. The pharmaceutical hub was her most stable growth line. Removing herself from it would mean rebuilding that operational segment from zero. Finding alternative distribution capacity at equivalent cost and speed in Seoul's current market would take a minimum of 4 months. 4 months of reduced output. Renegotiated contracts. Possible loss of the Incheon Hospital Group relationship she had just stabilized. The cost of clean independence was operationally significant. And that, she realized, was the architecture. Not a trap with walls. A structure where independence was technically available but practically expensive. Where staying was easier than leaving. Where the most logical business decision kept you inside the system. Imani made the decision on a Wednesday. She would restructure. Not completely. Not immediately. But she would begin building alternative infrastructure that did not carry flagged dependencies. She would take the short-term cost in exchange for long-term operational independence. She gave the restructure plan to Soo-jin with a clear instruction: identify the fastest viable path to clean operational routing across all 14 active lines. Soo-jin worked for 2 days. When she came back, her face was careful. There are 5 routes I can restructure cleanly within 60 days, she said. Standard replacements. Higher cost but workable. The other 9? Soo-jin placed the analysis on the desk. 4 can be restructured in 4 to 6 months. Significant timeline impact on current contracts. And the remaining 5? Soo-jin paused. The remaining 5 rely on Seoul's central financial clearing systems for settlement and compliance processing. Imani waited. Those clearing systems are not easily replaceable, Soo-jin said. They are the standard infrastructure for any operator at our scale in this market. Avoiding them would mean operating outside normal settlement protocols, which increases our compliance exposure significantly. Imani looked at the analysis. Who stabilizes the clearing systems? Soo-jin turned to the last page. A list of banking alliances. Governance partners. Stability guarantors. Imani read the list. She did not react visibly. But her hand stopped moving across the page. The clearing systems were not controlled by any one entity. That was the point. They operated through a consortium model. Multiple banking institutions. Regulatory co-signatories. A governance board with rotating membership. Stable. distributed. Trustworthy on the surface. Imani read the governance documents for 2 hours. The consortium had been formalized in 2018. Its original design came from a working group commissioned by the Korean Financial Services Commission. That working group had included 3 independent infrastructure advisors. She searched the first advisor's professional history. Standard. Academic background. Government consulting. The second advisor had moved into private sector work after the commission report. She searched the third. His career path included a 10-year period inside a financial infrastructure consulting group based in Hong Kong. That group had been dissolved in 2020. Its founding partners had gone separate ways. One of them had established a holding company that appeared, twice, in Soo Jin's original flagged entity list. Not the same person as the third advisor. The former colleague of the third advisor. The people who had designed the clearing infrastructure had professional histories that overlapped with the people connected to the flagged entities. Or it could be the reason the architecture had been designed exactly this way. Imani closed the documents. Restructuring away from flagged logistics had pushed her deeper into a system whose foundations were built by the same professional network. Independence, pursued aggressively, led back to the same origin. Seoul's financial clearing systems processed over 4 trillion won per month. They were not fragile. They were not secret. They were published infrastructure, used by hundreds of operators, audited quarterly, and considered the backbone of the city's mid-market financial activity. She also understood that published, widely used infrastructure was not the same as neutral infrastructure. Who built a system determined how it behaved under pressure. Who stabilized it determined who it protected when conditions changed. She compiled a clean summary of the banking alliances listed as clearing system stability guarantors. Cross-referenced their board memberships. Mapped their governance relationships over the past 6 years. But there were pressure points. 3 banking alliances that held disproportionate weight in governance decisions. Alliances that, if aligned, could influence operational policy inside the clearing systems in ways that would not be visible from the outside. She traced the governance histories of those 3 alliances. Each one had a period of significant restructuring between 2019 and 2022. Each one had received external advisory support during that restructuring period. She found the name of one of those senior personnel in a conference speaker list from 2020. The overlap was not dramatic. It was structural. And structural was harder to fight. The event sponsor, a holding company she had seen before. She set down her pen. The architecture was not one room. It was a city inside a city. Kang Jae-hyun did not interfere. That was the part Imani had not fully processed yet. Every friction point she had identified, every flagged route, every infrastructure dependency, none of it had been a direct action. Nothing had been done to her specifically. Nothing that could be challenged. Nothing that constituted a move in any visible sense. The clearing system influence had not been activated. The flagged entities had not blocked her operations. The meridian delay had resolved. Slowly, but it had resolved. The pharmaceutical shipment had cleared. Everything had continued moving. Just with resistance. Just with cost. Just with the kind of low friction that made independence difficult without making it impossible. That was the architecture. And its most important feature was this. She could choose. She could restructure. Take the cost. Build clean. Operate more slowly for 6 months and emerge on the other side with less dependency. That path was open. Kang had not closed it. He had simply made the other path easier. Stay inside the infrastructure. Accept the dependencies. Operate efficiently within a system that was already built, already running, already positioned to accommodate her growth. She could do that too. Both doors were open. One was expensive. One was comfortable. And the comfortable one led further inside. He had not forced her inside. He had designed the easiest path. He was letting her make it. The document was not public yet. It was circulating in private, passed between regulatory advisors, parliamentary staffers, and industry compliance teams. The kind of document that existed in draft form for months before it ever appeared in an official chamber. Imani received it through a contact inside the Financial Services Commission on a Thursday evening. A proposed regulatory reform bill. Title: Enhanced Compliance Standards for Cross-Border Financial Consultants Operating in Designated Infrastructure Sectors. She read it carefully. The bill would require independent foreign registered consultants operating in pharmaceutical distribution, logistics infrastructure, and venture capital intermediary roles to meet a new tier of compliance documentation. Quarterly audits. Local legal entity restructuring. A government-registered compliance officer requirement. On its own, the bill was not targeted. It applied broadly. Any independent foreign consultant in the designated sectors would face the same requirements. But the practical effect was specific. For large, established operators, those already embedded in the clearing systems and holding infrastructure, the new requirements were manageable. They had the legal teams, the local structures, the established government relationships. For a newer independent operator, still building infrastructure and managing capital timelines, the compliance load was significant. The quarterly audit requirement alone would consume resources she had allocated to expansion. She noted the bill's submission timeline. First reading, 6 weeks away. She looked at the forum date from her calendar. Kang had been at that forum 2 weeks ago. The steering committee he had spoken to included 2 parliamentary advisors. The reform bill had 4 co-sponsors. Imani researched each one. The first was a career regulator with a consistent record of compliance tightening. No unusual affiliations. The second had moved between public service and private consulting for 15 years. Standard profile for this type of legislation. The third had been on the board of a financial infrastructure governance body from 2019 to 2022. The same period as the clearing system restructuring. Imani cross-referenced his board membership with the governance records she had already compiled. He appeared once. A working group session in October 2020. The session topic: Long-term stability frameworks for designated infrastructure sectors. 3 other attendees from that session were listed publicly. One of them worked for an advisory firm she had already seen in her infrastructure mapping. She did not call this proof. She called it pattern density. What she could say, factually, was this. The bill would disproportionately affect newer independent operators in exactly the sectors she operated in. Its co-sponsors had professional histories that overlapped with the infrastructure network her audit had mapped. Its timeline placed the first reading 6 weeks from now, precisely when her Meridian Capital commitment was due to finalize. A finalization that required a clean compliance record. A delay in Meridian finalization would tighten her expansion runway by 4 months. 4 months was exactly how long it would take to restructure away from flagged infrastructure. The timing was precise. Not provable. Just precise. Imani did not panic when she saw the timing. She wrote it down. On a single sheet of paper, she mapped the sequence. The Meridian delay. The compliance bill. The infrastructure dependencies. The clearing system stabilization history. The forum. The steering committee. She placed the sheet in the center of her desk and looked at it from a distance. From a distance, it looked like a pattern. Up close, each individual element was explainable independently. Routine regulatory activity. Standard market friction. Coincidental professional overlaps. That was the design. A pattern that held together when viewed as a whole but dissolved into plausible coincidence the moment you examined any single piece. She could bring it to her venture partners. They would see risk where they currently saw opportunity and begin their own reassessment. She could do nothing. Continue operating. Absorb the friction. Build slowly inside the existing structure. Or she could move. But moving required resources she had partially committed to expansion. And expansion was currently pressing against the very infrastructure she was trying to move away from. She sat with the sheet for a long time. The architecture was elegant. Not because it locked her in. Because it made every exit cost exactly as much as staying. She folded the sheet. Put it in her drawer. Then opened her laptop and pulled up her expansion projections. She was not defeated. But she was no longer certain she had left. The restructure estimates were on her screen. Soo-jin had updated them twice since the initial draft. Each update accounted for new information from the audit. Each update made the clean path marginally more expensive. Current estimate for full operational independence from flagged infrastructure, 7 months. 31% increase in operational overhead during the transition. 2 contracts requiring renegotiation. 1 requiring termination. And that was before the compliance bill passed. If the bill passed in its current form, add a compliance restructuring cost on top. Add a compliance officer hire. Add quarterly audit preparation. Add legal entity restructuring for her sole registration. Total transition cost, if the bill passed, rose to a level that would require her to pause expansion entirely for the better part of a year. A year in Seoul was not delay. It was surrender of momentum. A year of pause. In Seoul's current market. With competitors moving. With the Incheon contract requiring sustained investment. With Meridian waiting for clarity on her compliance status before finalizing. She closed the estimate file. She understood now that this was not pressure. This was architecture. Built years before she arrived. Waiting for someone like her to enter it. Imani made a decision. Not retreat. Not full restructure. A workaround. She would create a parallel operational layer. A secondary sole entity, locally registered, locally staffed, that could interface with the clearing systems and hold the compliance-sensitive contracts. The primary entity would gradually step back from flagged infrastructure while the secondary entity maintained operational continuity. On the surface, her operations would appear unchanged. Underneath, she would be slowly shifting weight from one structure to another. It would cost less than full restructure. It would take less time. And it would preserve the appearance of stability to her partners while she moved. She spent 48 hours building the framework. Legal templates. Registration timelines. Staffing requirements. She reviewed the finished plan. It was workable. It was smart. It preserved surface autonomy while buying time for deeper restructuring. She gave it to Soo-jin for implementation planning. Then she sat back and ran the routing logic one more time. The secondary entity would need to access the clearing systems. Which meant it would need to operate inside the same governance framework. Which meant it would carry the same structural dependencies as the primary entity. The surface would look different. The foundations would be the same. She had built a second floor on the same ground. She sat with that for a moment. Then she approved the plan anyway. Because it was the best available option. And the best available was not the same as free. Director Yu placed the update on Kang's desk at 7:15 in the morning. He was already at his desk when she arrived. He read the single-page summary without coffee. Imani Sinclair had registered a secondary sole entity. Legal filing completed 2 days ago. Registration pending standard processing. The entity structure matched a parallel operational model, a common workaround used by independent operators managing compliance exposure. She had selected the workaround corridor. Kang set the page down. He had modeled 3 possible responses from her after the audit results. 1. Full restructure attempt. High cost, long timeline, significant market visibility. 2. Operational pause and partner reassessment. Conservative. Possible. 3. Parallel entity construction. Preserve surface operations while attempting gradual infrastructure migration. She had chosen 3. The same corridor he had designated as the lowest friction exit. Not because it led out. Because it led further into the same clearing system framework through a different door. The parallel entity would still require clearing system access. Which meant it would still sit inside the stabilized infrastructure. Which meant the operational dependencies did not change. They simply had a new label. Kang signed off on an unrelated expansion fund, a logistics investment in Busan, without comment on Imani's update. He said only one thing to you before she left. Approve the expansion capital for the Gyeonggi pharmaceutical corridor. It was an investment in a sector adjacent to Imani's primary growth line. Infrastructure, placed beside hers, before she arrived. The Gyeonggi pharmaceutical corridor approval moved through Kang's holding structure in 3 days. No announcement. No press. A standard internal capital allocation to a logistics subsidiary that had been operational for 2 years. The expansion doubled the corridor's distribution capacity, which made it the most efficient pharmaceutical routing option in the Greater Seoul region for operators at mid-market scale. Which was exactly the scale Imani's Incheon hospital contract required. The corridor became available for new operator partnerships the following Monday. By Wednesday, Imani's operations team had flagged it in a routine market scan. Felix sent her a note, new capacity opened in Gyeonggi. Significantly better margins than current Incheon routing. Should we evaluate? She read the note on her phone during a meeting. She did not respond immediately. After the meeting, she ran the operator check on the Gyeonggi corridor herself. The distribution hub was registered to a logistics subsidiary. Established 2022. Clean compliance history. No regulatory flags. No cross-border exposure concerns. 2 levels back in the ownership chain, a regional infrastructure fund. She searched the fund. 3 anchor investors. She read the names carefully. The third was a holding company she had not seen before. Recently registered. Clean. She searched that holding company's legal representative. The law firm's managing partner had appeared once in her infrastructure mapping. A footnote. A co-signatory on a working group document from 2021. She closed the search. Then she opened Felix's message and typed. Evaluate. Standard due diligence. Full infrastructure mapping before we commit. The Incheon Hospital Group sent a follow-up. They were reviewing alternative suppliers due to market volatility. She did not renegotiate. She let the contract sit. The network diagram filled the screen. Imani had built it herself over 3 evenings. Every active route. Every infrastructure dependency. Every flagged entity. Every clearing system connection. The secondary entity framework. The Gyeonggi corridor option. All of it connected. Color-coded lines filled the screen. Clean routes were rare. She stood back from the screen. There was almost no blue. Green and orange covered most of the diagram. The secondary entity she had built to create distance from the flagged infrastructure was green, clearing system dependent. The Gyeonggi corridor option was orange, adjacent to a known entity network. She traced the clean routes. 5 of them, marked in blue. They were real. They existed. They were operable. But they sat at the edges of the diagram. Moving to them fully meant contracting the entire center of her operation. Reducing scale. Rebuilding from a smaller foundation. She could do that. Or she could continue operating at current scale, inside a structure where every major artery touched infrastructure with a common architectural origin. She zoomed out on the diagram. From a distance, the green and orange formed a shape. Not a cage. Not walls. A room. A fully furnished, efficiently designed, operationally excellent room. With a door that opened inward. She had not been locked inside. She had been made comfortable inside. And comfortable, over time, produced the same result as locked. Imani turned off the screen at 11:47 p.m. She sat in the dark for a moment. Not because she was lost. Not because she was defeated. Because she was thinking precisely. She had entered Seoul's financial infrastructure as an independent operator. She had challenged the structure. She had transferred strategic ownership away from Kang Jae-hyun in a public, deliberate move designed to establish independence. And she had expanded. Quickly. Efficiently. Into corridors that were available, functional, and well-priced. Corridors that had been built years before she arrived. Corridors that had been waiting. She had not been blocked from independence. She had been offered a city. And the city was his. Not through force. Not through threat. Not through any single visible action she could point to and name. Through architecture. Through the patient, systematic building of infrastructure that surrounded every natural expansion path available to an operator at her scale. She had moved into it the way water moves into a shaped container. Following the available space. Filling the form that was already there. She turned the screen back on. Pulled up the network diagram. Looked at it for a long time. Then she opened a new document and began to write. Not a response. Not a legal challenge. A new map. Different scale. Different city. Different corridors. And this time, she would build first. Kang Jae-hyun did not close the door on Imani Sinclair. He removed the walls and built the room around her instead.